Welcome to another edition of the Dual Threat Sports Podcast. We're your hosts, Micah Wright and Jaden Lewis. And NFL Week 6 was pretty horrible for referees, Jaden. I think that's the biggest story to take away.
Yep, the big game on Monday night, Packers-Lions. Lions were up 13-0, but going down late in the game, there were two huge penalties against, I think it was Ziggy Ansah. No, is that him?
It was Trey Flowers.
Trey Flowers,
Yeah.
and two legal hands to the face that were called in favor of the Packers, and Mason Crosby would end up kicking the game winner to win the game.
And really the problem was it was clear to, I think, most everyone that those were not penalties. And those were the two biggest calls. One of them, I think, would have forced a punt, and instead the Packers go get a touchdown. Actually, both of them ended up resulting in a touchdown because it was on the same drive. But that just can't happen, and we've seen so many bad calls, whether it's roughing the passer, where it seems like defensive players really don't know how to tackle the quarterback, and that's become a huge problem. And then we get penalties like this where I think a number of official analysts, I guess you could call them, are saying how wrong this is and how something needs to change.
Yep. And also, there's a big game tonight. The Kansas City Chiefs are playing the Denver Broncos in Denver, and this is a Kansas City team that has been struggling the last two games. They're on a two-game losing streak, and what seems to be the problem is I think teams are starting to figure them out. The last 2 weeks, teams have held them to 89 yards rushing, and that's over the last 2 weeks. But the Chiefs have won 7 straight against Denver, dating back to 2015. But Denver's coming off of a shutout over the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, Denver dominated that game, and they also dominated the Chargers the week before that, who they're a whole different story. But, I never really liked them getting Joe Flacco. I thought they were just as good with keeping Case Keenum. But I think it'll be a pretty good game because the Chiefs' defense is so bad that no matter who they'll play has a chance to beat them. And Phillip Lindsay, I think, will have a big game unless the Chiefs just completely try to stop the run and load the box like they probably should do. But even then, they have trouble tackling. I think they have one of the worst linebacking cores in the league. But Mahomes will always put up good numbers. But the last couple weeks, he's actually struggled. I think he did end up throwing 3 touchdowns against the Texans in their loss. But he threw his first interception. And I think the past 2 weeks in those losses, he's only completing like 56% of his passes. And then another team that's really struggling is the Browns. They definitely have to figure it out. The hype, I don't think they're definitely not living up to the hype, and I think a lot of people could see that coming.
For the Browns, it's that hype situation. Like we kind of knew it was all coming. I mean, it's the Browns, and Freddie Kitchens. He wasn't really a proven coach yet. He just had I think he got lucky just like last season.
All right, so before we get into some MLB playoffs, let's talk about the new Popeyes chicken sandwich. The sandwich features a buttermilk battered and hand-breaded white meat chicken fillet topped with pickles and a spicy Cajun bread on a toasted brioche bun. With more than 3,000 restaurants across the country, there's no better place to treat yourself than Popeyes Louisiana Kitchen, as they have been treating Americans for nearly 50 years. All right, so MLB playoffs. The Washington Nationals, I can't believe this, are in their first ever World Series.
What's even more impressive is they swept my St. Louis Cardinals 4-0. The first 2 games, they won the first game 2-0, gave up only 1 hit, then 3 won the second game. They won the last 2 games 8-1 and 7-4, scoring 7 runs in the first inning. And that was just very shocking because I think they were, early in the year, they were 10 games from 500.
I believe it was either 12 or 13. They were way far out of the NL wild card, but they're just a team that got hot, and we see this, every couple years. There's a team. Actually, even last year, the Brewers were that team that got hot and ended up winning their division. The Nats didn't win the division, but they were just playing amazing baseball down the stretch, and their pitching staff is unbelievable. And the surprising thing was Anibal Sanchez pitched that one hitter. And, he's really kind of the under-the-radar guy on that pitching staff. But Max Scherzer is always unbelievable, Hall of Fame guy. Steven Strasburg is maybe more of a fringe Hall of Famer, but he's one of the best in the league, definitely.
Yep. And then on the AL side, the Astros, they play a big game tonight, Game 4. tonight at 7:08. They currently lead the New York Yankees 2-1 after falling behind a game. Hit a walk-off run in Game 2, and then now won Game 3 in New York.
Yeah, the Yankees, they just haven't been able to score runs, and Garrett Cole has been the best pitcher in all of baseball. I mean, he won Game 3, I believe, didn't he? Yeah, Game 3. He hasn't lost since May 22nd, which is crazy. And every game, you're either going to get a shutout or maybe 1 or 2 runs allowed maximum, which is crazy. And but the Yankees obviously aren't out of it. They still have 2 more games at home to make up for it, and they did get a win in Houston, which was huge. So I think that series will go 7 games, and this is really, both these teams are, I think, far better than the Nats. So I think this might be really the World Series for everyone else in terms of watching a closer games and closer series. But I think we got to talk about the Dodgers, because that was an all-time collapse, especially for Clayton Kershaw.
Oh yeah, that was the Dodgers. It's been a few years in a row where they went to the World Series. Was it back-to-back years?
Yeah, and they had a chance to go to 3 straight
and collapse each time. Dodgers haven't won a World Series since 1989, I think. It's just been so long. I know the fans are frustrated, and it just wasn't a good year again for them.
I think I saw something where they had the most wins without winning a playoff series. They won 106 games, which is just crazy to just have that amount to, only 2 playoff wins. But, like we said, the Nats were hot. They got that wild card game to kind of help get them ready for postseason series. And before we talk some college football, we have a word from the ESPN Fantasy app. So it's fantasy football season, and you can still create a team and join a league. The Fantasy app on ESPN is the #1 source in the world for fantasy football, with tons of information on players from some of the best analysts out there. ESPN Fantasy Sports is second to none when it comes to fantasy football. Join a league and create a team today on fantasy.espn.com or download the ESPN Fantasy app from the App Store. So college football week 7, and a crazy upset that saw Georgia lose at home to South Carolina in 2 overtimes.
That game was crazy. The game goes into overtime. South Carolina ends up getting an interception in the first overtime, but their kicker, Parker Wright, missed a field goal. And then going into the second overtime, Wright he was successful this time making it. But then Georgia's kicker, who's one of the best kickers in the nation, one of the best kickers I've seen, Rodrigo Blankenship, missed. And kickers miss, but that just happens. It was South Carolina's first win over a top 5 team, I think, since they beat Mizzou back in 2013. And now Mizzou themselves, our team, sits on top of the SEC East.
Yeah, Mizzou, I think that was a pretty impressive game because Ole Miss is, better than I think people think and give them credit for. So Mizzou's 22, which is nice to see, but South Carolina, they looked pretty bad when they played Mizzou. I know we were both at that game, and you didn't really know if it was that impressive of a win, but it starts looking better for Mizzou. But Georgia, it's just an awful appearance, at home, and South Carolina had their 3rd string quarterback in, I believe, which is even crazier that they won that game. So Georgia, for all that talk last year of complaining that they didn't make the playoff, you got to win these games to get into the playoff, and right now it's not looking good at all. And then there was a great game down in Louisiana, Florida and LSU, high-scoring game, which is very rare to see in that rivalry.
Yeah, there was 968 yards of combined total offense in that game. We knew Florida would stick around in the first half, but of course LSU would pull away. Joe Burrow continues to impress. He had 293 yards and 3 scores. Clyde Edwards-Hilaire, he had 134 yards on the ground, and then Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson both had 100-plus receiving yards through the air. So LSU's offense is something which we've said before. We're not used to seeing them explode like this, and they just continue to impress.
Yeah, I love Joe Burrow, and I think he's starting to get the credit he deserves. I think I saw Pro Football Focus had him as the #1 quarterback and #1 player taken in their early mock draft for next year. But he only had 3 incompletions that whole game, 3 touchdowns. I mean, that's unbelievable. And Kyle Trask, who stepped in, and he was the backup heading into the season, he showed a lot of guts in that game, and I think Florida is definitely going to compete down the stretch, and that's going to be a tough team to face.
Yep. Also, another game where both teams combined for 800 yards of total offense was the Oklahoma-Texas, the Red River rivalry at the Cotton Bowl. Jalen Hurts, he overcame some early turnovers, but still showed why he's one of the best quarterbacks in the nation, having 235 yards through the air and 131 yards on the ground.
Yeah, and then the other kind of big game was Oklahoma-Texas, and that kind of went like I feel like a lot of people thought it would go. Oklahoma was just the better team and made more plays down the stretch. Jalen Hurts kind of struggled early, but he got into the mix and got into a rhythm and won that game for him. So I think that was big to see for Oklahoma.
We are just days away from the start of the 2019 NBA season, and with basketball season approaching, that means it's time for fantasy basketball. Download the #1 sports fantasy app, the ESPN Fantasy app, and start a league of your own with friends or just a random one on your own. It's completely free to play, and you'll get live updates and scores while following your players. You can start at any time during the season, so there's no rush. Download the ESPN Fantasy app on Apple or Android and create your league today.
All right, so before we end today's edition of the Dual Threat Sports Podcast, we have our NFL picks. So let's get this NFL primetime music going. We start tonight, Kansas City at Denver. Denver's looking impressive with back-to-back wins, but I have the Chiefs 27-21.
Like we said before, Kansas City's run 7 straight. I still think they will struggle in offense, but I have Kansas City pulling this one out 23-20.
Then the Rams, who are struggling, go to the Falcons, who are really struggling in Atlanta, but I got the Rams 31-28.
Both of these teams have been very disappointing this year. I think the Rams will pull it off 27-20.
Then the Miami Dolphins, who are still winless, go to Buffalo. There's no chance the Dolphins win. 23-10 Bills.
I think Buffalo only has 1 loss. They look impressive, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I have Buffalo shutting out Miami 23-0.
Jacksonville goes to Cincinnati. Jacksonville coming off back-to-back losses. I think the Bengals get their first win of the season, 26-23.
I think Andy Dalton has an okay game, enough to get Cincinnati over the hump and give their new coach a first win.
Zach Taylor's first win. All right, and then Minnesota at Detroit. Vikings have kind of struggled at Ford Field lately, but I like the way they're playing. I got them winning 24-16.
Minnesota's 0-2 in the division. They haven't played very good in Detroit recently. Detroit played Kansas City good at home. They beat the Chargers and the Eagles, so I'm having Detroit winning this one 23-20.
Yeah, Detroit could easily be 5-0. Then my Oakland Raiders go to Green Bay. That's such a tough matchup. I don't think they've won there since the 80s. I think Green Bay will win it 27-20, but it'll be pretty close.
If this game was in Oakland, I would have Oakland winning, but I think Aaron Rodgers, you know how he is, so I have Green Bay winning 28-19.
The reverse jinx has worked for us when we pick against our teams,
yes,
by the way.
has.
Just keep that in your minds for those of you listening. So Houston at Indy, I think this has a chance to be one of the better games. I got Houston 30-24. I love the way Deshaun Watson's playing.
Jacoby Brissett, he knows how to get things done. I'm having Indianapolis winning this game 24-22.
Then the Cardinals, coming off a nice win against the Falcons, head to New York to face the Giants, or New Jersey actually to face the Giants. 34-27 Giants.
Yeah, I have the Giants winning this one in a high-scoring game. Daniel Jones versus Kyler Murray, 2 rookie matchups, 30-28.
So San Francisco at Washington. 49ers are undefeated and surprising a lot of people. I got them 28-17.
Yeah, I have San Francisco over Bill Callahan's Redskins 31-14.
And then Chargers at Tennessee. I got Chargers 20-16.
And I have Chargers as well, 14-10, low scoring.
Then you got the Saints, who are playing great. Go to Chicago would be very impressive. And just another great win without Drew Brees if they can do it. And I think they can, 23-16.
I have them winning a defensive game, 16-13.
Then Baltimore goes to Seattle. I think this is the game of the week. But I've got Seattle 28-23. Russell Wilson right now is the MVP of this season.
And I have Seattle winning as well, 33-31.
Philly at Dallas, another good game. I got Philly on the road, 27-24.
I'm having Dallas rebounding 24-17.
And then New England at New York, New England 34-17.
New England 31-28.
All right, that is this edition of the Dual Threat Sports Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.